Washington, D.C., 1971, a city bustling with political activity where decisions that shaped the nation were made daily. A city of power, of politics, of monuments to freedom. The Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, symbols of hope and democracy, stood tall and proud. But beneath the surface, a darkness lurked. A sinister presence that would soon shatter the lives of many. In the spring of that year, a string of disappearances shook the nation's capital. The city, known for its grandeur, was now gripped by fear. 6 young black girls, all teenagers, vanished from their neighborhoods within weeks of each other. Their faces, once full of life and dreams, now stared back from missing posters plastered across the city. Their names were Carol Spinks, Darlenia Johnson, Brenda Crockett, Nenemoshia Yates, Brenda Woodard, and Diane Williams. Each name, each face, a story of a life interrupted. Their stories, tragically intertwined, remain a chilling reminder of justice denied. The connections between their disappearances were undeniable, yet the answers remained elusive. The disappearances began in April, casting a pall over the city as spring blossomed. The air, once filled with the promise of new beginnings, now carried a sense of dread. Each case, heartbreakingly similar, sent chills down the spines of parents and ignited fear in the hearts of children. The neighborhoods, once safe havens, now felt like traps. These weren't runaways, not teenagers seeking adventure. They were taken, their lives abruptly and violently disrupted. These were daughters, sisters, friends snatched away from their lives, their futures stolen before they could truly begin. Families were left with empty rooms and broken hearts. The police launched an investigation, but the trail quickly went cold. Leads that seemed promising turned into dead ends, and the community's hope began to wane. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still, there was no sign of the missing girls. The posters faded, but the pain remained fresh. The city held its breath, hoping against hope for their safe return, but as time wore on, a grim reality settled in. Something terrible had happened. The sense of despair grew, and hope began to fade. This wasn't just a local tragedy, it was a national disgrace. The story of the missing girls captured the attention of the entire country, highlighting the vulnerabilities within our society. 6 young lives extinguished, their families left to grapple with unimaginable grief, and a city left to question its safety, its conscience. The pain of loss was compounded by the lack of answers. The case of the missing DC girls became a haunting reminder of the vulnerability of innocence and the enduring power of unanswered questions. The city and the nation were left to ponder the darkness that had taken these young lives and the justice that had yet to be served. During this span of terror, 6 young black girls, aged 10 to 18, fell victim to a sadistic predator who abducted, killed, and callously left their bodies near the I-295, the Anacostia Freeway. The heinous crimes shattered the lives of the victims' families. The first reported victim was 13-year-old Carol Denise Spinks. On April 25, 1971, she vanished while on her way home from a 7-Eleven store just across the Maryland border. 6 days later, her lifeless body was discovered behind St. Elizabeth's Hospital, near the northbound lanes of I-295. They knocked on doors, spoke to neighbors, and reached out to anyone who might have seen Carol. The community rallied around them, but days turned into weeks with no sign of the young girl. The autopsy revealed signs of physical and sexual assault, alongside strangulation. This raised the chilling specter of a sadistic killer at large. Her family, clinging to hope, plastered missing posters across the city, their pleas for her safe return echoing through the streets. Darlenia Johnson. On July 8, 1971, Johnson, 16, from Congress Heights, was abducted while en route to her summer job at Oxon Hill Recreation Center. One witness reported having seen Johnson in an old black car driven by an African-American male shortly after her abduction. 11 days later, her body was located only 15 feet (4.6 meters) from where Spinks had been found, even though police had been notified of the location of the corpse nearly a week earlier by an anonymous caller who had details only her killer could have known. By that time, Johnson's body, again dressed but without her shoes, was far too decomposed to determine the cause of death, or if she had been sexually assaulted, but law enforcement was able to find evidence of strangulation. Brenda Faye Crockett. On July 27, 1971, 10-year-old Crockett from Northwest failed to return home after having been sent to the store by her mother. About 2 hours later, around 9:20 p.m., The Crockett's phone rang and was answered by her 7-year-old sister, who had waited at home while her family searched the neighborhood. Crockett was on the other line, crying. "A white man picked me up, and I'm heading home in a cab," Crockett told her sister, adding that she believed she was in Virginia before abruptly saying, "Bye," and hanging up. A short time later, the phone rang again, and was this time answered by the stepfather of Crockett. It was Crockett again, and she merely repeated what she'd said in the last telephone call, adding, "Did my mother see me?" and indicating she was alone in a house with a white male. Her stepfather asked her to have the man come to the phone. Heavy footsteps were heard in the background, and Crockett said, "I'll see you," and hung up. Authorities quickly concluded that Crockett likely called her home at the behest of the killer, who fed her inaccurate information in order to buy the necessary time to perpetrate the crime and to hamper the investigation. At 5:50 a.m. the next day, a hitchhiker discovered Crockett's shoeless body in a conspicuous location on U.S. Route 50, near the Baltimore-Washington Parkway in Prince George's County, Maryland. She had been raped and strangled, and a scarf was knotted around her neck. Nenomosha Yates, known as Nino, was only 12 years old and in 6th grade at Kelly Miller Junior High School. She was living with her father and stepmother in Washington, D.C. Nino just became an older sister as her stepmother had recently given birth. Unfortunately, there is limited information about Nemo as a person. On the evening of October 1, 1971, Nino left her home located on the 4,900 block of Benning Road in southeast D.C. to go down the block, less than a block away from her home, to a local Safeway store. She had to get paper plates, sugar, and flour. She left her home at 7 p.m. An employee was able to confirm to police that Nino did purchase the groceries. It is believed that she was abducted from the parking lot. A witness recalls seeing Nino getting into a blue Volkswagen. However, this lead has not produced further information. 3 hours later, Nino's body was found on Pennsylvania Avenue by a 16-year-old unidentified hitchhiker. She was strangled and sexually assaulted. Her strangulation was so violent that her killer broke her esophagus. Her shoes were missing, but she was fully clothed. Authorities did find unknown green fibers on her clothing. Brenda Woodard was only 18 years old when her life abruptly ended. Brenda Denise Woodard was 18 years old and had her entire life ahead of her. Brenda was taking night classes at Cardozo High School because she was looking to perfect her shorthand and typing skills. She had 5 siblings and had recently moved out 3 weeks before her death because she kept coming home late. Brenda Woodard was only 18 years old when her life abruptly ended. On November 15, 1971, Brenda attended night school with a friend. When class ended, Brenda and her classmate went to Ben's Chili Bowl for dinner. Brenda's classmate typically gives her a ride home, but her car was in the shop, which is why they took the bus. When they finish eating, Brenda and her friend catch a local bus. Brenda got off at 8th and H Street and had to transfer to another bus to get home. This is the last time Brenda is seen. It remains unknown when Brenda was abducted, whether it was at the second bus stop or while walking home. The next morning, Brenda's body is discovered by a police officer doing a routine check. Brenda would be found strangled and sexually assaulted. She was stabbed multiple times. Authorities were able to determine that Brenda likely fought off her attacker because of the defense wounds that were discovered on her hands. Brenda Woodard's body was found with a handwritten note signed by the Freeway Phantom that read, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can. Freeway Phantom." Diane Williams was only 17 years old when her life abruptly ended. She had her entire life ahead of her. Diane had just started her junior year at Ballou High School located in Washington, D.C. Diane was born on February 2, 1955. She was the oldest of 6 children. Those who knew Diane remember her incredible taste in fashion. She had aspirations to become a model. Diane Williams was last seen on the evening of September 5, 1972. She had made her family dinner before she left home to visit her boyfriend. By 11:21 p.m., Diane's boyfriend walked her to the bus stop so she could head home located on Martin Luther King Ard. The bus driver recalls that Diane exited the bus at the Martin Luther King and South Capitol Street stop, where she would only have to walk a short distance home. It can be assumed that Diane was abducted near around the bus stop or while on her walk home. There is very little information regarding Diane's whereabouts after she exited the bus. As the disappearances continued, a chilling pattern emerged. Each girl was black, between the ages of 12 and 18. They were all last seen in their own neighborhoods, seemingly snatched from familiar streets where they should have been safe. The similarities were too striking to ignore, whispering a terrifying possibility. A predator was stalking the city, preying on its most vulnerable citizens. Witnesses described seeing a green Chevrolet Impala cruising the areas where the girls vanished. Some recalled a man matching a vague description, African-American, mid-20s to early 30s, with a muscular build and a scar near his left eye. The details, though fragmented, fueled the growing fear that gripped the community. The police investigated every lead, but the case remained frustratingly elusive. The green Impala, if it was indeed connected to the abductions, was never located. The man with the scar remained a phantom, his face forever etched in the nightmares of a city on edge. The lack of concrete evidence only deepened the mystery, leaving investigators grappling with more questions than answers. Who was behind these horrific acts? Was it one person, or were multiple individuals involved? And most importantly, where were the missing girls? The community, once vibrant and full of life, now lived in a state of constant fear and suspicion. Parents held their children closer, and curfews became stricter. The streets that were once filled with laughter and play were now eerily silent, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next tragedy to strike. Community meetings were held, and vigils were organized to keep the memory of the missing girls alive. People shared their theories and suspicions, hoping that someone, somewhere, had seen something that could break the case wide open. The local media covered the story extensively, but despite the heightened awareness, the disappearances continued. It was as if the predator was always one step ahead, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The police, under immense pressure, doubled their efforts. They increased patrols, set up hotlines, and even brought in experts from other cities to assist with the investigation. Yet, every promising lead seemed to end in a dead end. The frustration was palpable, not just among the investigators but throughout the entire community. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming, and the question on everyone's mind was the same. When would this nightmare end? Despite the darkness that had descended upon the city, there was still a glimmer of hope. The community's resilience was unwavering. They refused to let fear dictate their lives. They continued to fight for justice, for answers, and most importantly, for the safe return of their daughters. The whispers in the wind carried their prayers, their hopes, and their determination. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. They would not rest until the mystery was solved and their loved ones were brought back home. The disappearances sent shockwaves through the city, shattering the illusion of safety and leaving residents reeling in fear and disbelief. Parents kept their children close, their eyes constantly scanning the streets, their hearts heavy with worry and dread. The once familiar rhythm of city life was replaced by an undercurrent of anxiety, a palpable tension that hung in the air. The Black community, already grappling with social and economic disparities, felt the weight of the tragedy most acutely. The disappearances exposed a raw nerve, highlighting the vulnerability of Black girls and the systemic inequities that often rendered their cases overlooked and undervalued. Outrage and frustration boiled over as the community demanded answers, demanding justice for their stolen daughters. Protests erupted, marches filled the streets, and the cries for action grew louder with each passing day. The families of the missing girls, united by grief and a shared sense of urgency, became vocal advocates, refusing to let their loved ones be forgotten. The case of the missing DC girls became a rallying cry, a stark reminder of the human cost of silence and indifference. It forced the city to confront its own biases, its own failings, and the urgent need for systemic change. Like, share, and subscribe.